seventh graders. So today we're going to write some odes. And odes, a very old type of poem. In fact, the first odes were written by this poet in ancient Greece named Pindar. He wrote these odes that celebrate the great athletes of ancient Greece who were competing in those ancient Greek Olympics. Did you guys know they had the Olympics thousands of years ago? They had a lot of the same events actually that we do today, like running races, horse races, javelin, but also some events that we no longer have, like chariot races. So an ode celebrates a thing or a person. Pindar would celebrate these athletes by comparing them to the Greek gods, who were the best at everything. So he might say, "You are as strong and mighty as Zeus, or as powerful as Poseidon, or as skilled as Artemis." These comparisons are called similes, and odes use a lot of similes in metaphor. So a simile is a comparison of two things that aren't like each other using like or as. Often we use similes with some exaggeration. You might have heard that I'm quite tall. It's hard to see that through the video, but I am 6'4". And in describing my tallness, you could use a simile, right? He is as tall as a giraffe, a redwood tree, the snow-capped tippy top of Lolo Peak. A metaphor is when you make a direct comparison, say something is something else, even though it's not actually that other thing. For instance, instead of saying, "I am a tall teacher among the small fourth grade children I teach in the classroom," I could say, "I'm a giant redwood tree among a grove of small saplings." I'm not actually a redwood tree, nor are those fourth graders saplings, but metaphors can help us to see something in a different and more interesting way. So today we're going to write an ode in which we try and use a lot of original similes and metaphors. Over the years, odes have been written to celebrate people, but also to celebrate some pretty ordinary things. So here's a famous ode by Chilean poet Pablo Neruda about a pair of socks. As I read it, I want you to notice some of the similes and metaphors he uses to celebrate and show us these socks. Ode to a pair of socks. Marumori brought me a pair of socks, which she knitted herself with her sheep-herder's hands. 2 socks as soft as rabbits. So already there we have a simile, right? Comparing the softness to rabbits. I slipped my feet into them as though into 2 cases knitted with threads of twilight and goatskin. Now, can you knit with twilight and goatskin? No, definitely not, right? You can't knit with twilight. It's a type of light. But often this is what similes do. They compare to some unlike thing, and they compare it to something that is kind of fantastic, right? Or is hard to imagine, but we can still think about how beautiful those socks would be if they were knitted from twilight. Violent socks. My feet were 2 fish made of wool, 2 long sharks sea blue shot through by 1 golden thread, 2 immense blackbirds, 2 cannons. So here it starts to put on these socks, right? And his feet start to change shape, right? They become sharks, right? Blackbirds, cannons. But they're not actually becoming these things, right? He's using metaphor here, showing how amazing these socks are. They're almost like magical and alive. My feet were honored in this way by these heavenly socks. They were so handsome for the first time, my feet seemed to me unacceptable, like 2 decrepit firemen unworthy of that woven fire of those glowing socks. Nevertheless, I resisted the sharp temptation to save them somewhere, as schoolboys keep fireflies, as learned men collect sacred texts. I resisted the mad impulse to put them into a golden cage, and each day give them birdseed and pieces of pink melon. So what is he comparing the socks to here, right? He's resisting the temptation to put them in a cage and each day give them birdseed and pieces of pink melon. So he's comparing them to a bird, like something he would put off in the corner and just look at, which seems pretty ridiculous when you're talking about a pair of socks. But then again, have you ever had something that you really cherished, maybe that you got brand new, and you didn't want to mess it up, you didn't want to use it or wear it, and so you sort of just looked at it for a while? So that's kind of like this pair of socks. He doesn't want to mess them up and get them smelly quite yet. Like explorers in the jungle who hand over the very rare green deer to the spit and eat it with remorse, I stretched out my feet and pulled on the magnificent socks and then my shoes. Right? So again, he uses a simile to show him finally putting on his socks and shoes, right? He really, like explorers in the jungle, right, who start cooking the deer over the spit, they really didn't want to have to kill this deer, right? Because it was so rare. They had remorse about it. They were sad about it. And yet they needed this deer to survive, right? Because they were explorers in the jungle. So much like that, he was meant to wear these socks. They're meant to be worn. So he finally puts them on. The moral of my ode is this: beauty is twice beauty, and what is good is doubly good, was a matter of two socks made a fool in winter. So odes often end with a moral or a lesson, right? In this case, the lesson is saying how good it is to have two socks, especially in winter, and two wool socks, especially in winter, right? There's nothing that beats that. So you can also have a moral or a lesson at the end of your ode. So Pablo Neruda really makes out these socks to be pretty incredible, right? Now you guys are going to write an ode using similes and metaphors to celebrate something. Except instead of socks, you're going to write an ode about something else ordinary that you could find in your locker or your backpack. It could be the locker, an ode to the locker, or an ode to the backpack itself. Could be an ode to a pencil, a notebook, a binder, a water bottle, maybe a pair of shoes, whatever you might find in there. So first I want you to think about the thing you want to write about and how you would best celebrate it, right, for all its qualities. And start thinking about some similes and metaphors to describe it, right? Use simile and metaphor to describe its shape, its color, its texture, its smell, its purpose. What makes this object or thing so fantastic? What does it allow you to do? How can you really celebrate it? Here's an example ode from a 7th grade student. Ode to my backpack. Oh, backpack, you're like a whole different world when I open you, filled with loose paper and old crumpled assignments, as old as the rugged cliffs shaped by ocean waves. You're like a young girl's doll that gets tossed around and scratched. Your seams have started to rip because you couldn't fit any more books and folders. You're as stuffed as a person who won an eating contest at a fair. On summer vacation, you're forgotten on the coat hook, like a red Hot Wheel that gets lost under the couch and collects dust. So I encourage you to push for similes that are really original and detailed. They can help us to see the object more clearly and just be more interesting to read. So try and expand that simile that originally pops into your head, right? Like red is a rose, red is blood. We've heard those a lot, right? Maybe it's red as your cheeks as you realize you've messed up your lines in the school play in front of the entire middle school. For instance, Sierra could have written as old as a rock, but as old as the rugged cliffs shaped by ocean waves allows us to really see those cliffs that have been shaped and formed over millions of years. So before you start to write, take a look at a few other odes written by 7th graders about ordinary things they could find in their locker. and then you'll write your own ode. I look forward to reading these and hearing you guys read them later this week.